renowned painter with a growing reputation for capturing the raw essence of his subjects, but known also for his eccentric, almost obsessive pursuit of perfection. Dante is a man haunted by the idea of immortality through his art, forever searching for ways to freeze beauty in time. The story unfolds in Villa Gris, a sprawling Gothic mansion located on the outskirts of a forgotten European village. The mansion itself seems alive with history, its walls covered in fading tapestries and dusty portraits of former occupants who stare with hollow eyes. Thick ivy climbs the outer stone walls, twisting through cracked windows. Inside, the floors creak with age, and a deep silence hangs in the air, broken only by the occasional drip of water from unseen leaks. In this shadowy retreat, Dante's masterpiece hangs in his private gallery, veiled by a heavy velvet curtain. A single painting, once a reflection of his youthful splendor, now hides something darker, a grotesque transformation of his soul. Dante spends his days in isolation, consumed by his art. The servants have long abandoned the place, leaving him alone with his obsession. Only his butler, an elderly man with sunken eyes and a voice that barely rises above a whisper, remains, tending to Dante's needs in eerie silence. The mansion has become a labyrinth of forgotten memories and unsettling stillness, with rooms locked for decades, left to rot in the past. Outside, a dense forest surrounds a villa, casting long, twisted shadows that seem to reach for the windows when the wind howls through the trees. At night, the mansion groans with the weight of its secrets, as if it remembers everything that has transpired within its walls. Have you ever wondered what price you would pay for eternal beauty? How far would you go to preserve your youth while the world around you withers away? Dante Galen, a painter of extraordinary talent and dangerous ambition, has discovered a terrifying answer. His art is not just a reflection of life. It has become the very essence of his curse. Hidden deep within his mansion, in a room no one dares to enter, there hangs a portrait. But this is no ordinary painting. As Dante remains forever young, the portrait withers, decays, and morphs into something unspeakable, reflecting not just the passage of time, but every dark, immoral act that he has committed. And the truth is, the portrait is no longer just a painting. It watches him, it knows him, and awaits. Dante was once celebrated for his brilliance. His paintings adorned the walls of the wealthiest aristocrats and the most esteemed galleries. But as his fame grew, so did his thirst for perfection, his hunger for immortality, not just through his art, but in his very being, led him down a path of unthinkable darkness. It was during a lavish party at Villa Gris that Dante first met a mysterious stranger, a collector of rare and forgotten artifacts. This man spoke of ancient rituals, ones capable of preserving beauty far beyond what nature intended. Tempted by vanity and the promise of eternal youth, Dante struck a deal, one that would grant him what he desired most. But as we all know, such bargains come with a price. As the years passed, Dante never aged a day, while the portrait locked away behind the heavy velvet curtain began to change. Subtle at first, slight cracks in the paint, a faint shadow under the eyes of the figure. But soon, it became grotesque, a twisted mockery of the man Dante once was. The eyes, once vibrant with life, grew hollow, sunken deep into their sockets, as if peering into the abyss. The mouth twisted into a sneer, a silent scream frozen in time. The skin, once flawless, now rotted and cracked, peeling away like old parchment. The portrait had become more than a reflection. It had become alive with the weight of Dante's sins. But tonight, Dante feels something different. There's a presence in the air, a suffocating dread that clings to his every breath. The portrait, hidden behind the curtain, seems to pulse with life. Something has changed. It no longer merely reflects his actions. It judges him. The mansion feels more alive than ever, its shadows crawling along the walls as if they are watching, waiting. Dante knows he must confront the portrait. But before we delve deeper into the mystery, take a moment to subscribe to this channel and give this video a like. trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next, as Dante's twisted journey into darkness is just beginning. With every step Dante takes toward the portrait, the air grows colder, the darkness deeper. His once beautiful mansion now feels like a crypt, entombing secrets too terrible to speak of. The weight of his choices bears down on him, the silence of the villa broken only by the soft whisper of the wind through the cracked windows. As his hand reaches for the curtain that hides his darkest secret, a sudden gust of wind howls through the gallery, extinguishing the candles in a single breath. Darkness swallows the room, and in the pitch-black silence, Dante hears it, a faint, raspy breath. But it's not his own. Something is breathing. From within the portrait, that night, Dante falls into a deep, restless sleep, his mind clouded by the weight of his past and the terror of the portrait. The room around him fades into darkness, and suddenly, he finds himself standing in his studio. The air is thick with the smell of old paint, turpentine, and something else. Something foul, like the scent of rotting flesh hidden just beneath the surface. The sound of dripping water echoes from the corners, though there is no leak. His footsteps reverberate through the eerie silence as he approaches the easel at the center of the room, his heart pounding in his chest. The dim light casts long shadows across the floor, and for a moment, everything feels familiar, too familiar. The studio in the dream is a perfect replica of the one in reality, but with small, unsettling differences. The once vibrant colors of the paintings that adorn the walls are now muted, as if drained of life. The portraits of his past subjects stare at him, their eyes following his every move. Their expressions, once serene and elegant, are now twisted into grotesque, mocking smiles. Dante can feel their gaze crawling across his skin, sending shivers down his spine. The hairs on the back of his neck stand on end as he realizes something is terribly wrong. As he moves closer to the center of the room, a cold breeze sweeps through, though there are no windows open. The familiar scent of the villa's garden, the blooming roses and fresh earth, is replaced by the nauseating stench of decay. His hands brush against the furniture, but instead of feeling smooth wood or cool metal, his fingers meet something wet, something sticky. He pulls his hand back to find it smeared with a dark, viscous liquid. His breath quickens. He wipes it on his shirt, but the stain only spreads, seeping into the fabric like a spreading disease. Panic grips him as he looks up at the painting covered by the heavy velvet curtain in the center of the room. Suddenly, the familiar creaking of the old mansion begins to echo through the dream. The walls groan, the floorboards beneath his feet shift slightly, and a low, distant hum vibrates through the air, growing louder with each passing second. It's not the comforting sound of a storm outside. It's something else entirely, something alive. The shadows around him begin to move, slithering along the floor and walls as if they have a life of their own. They crawl toward him, slow at first, then faster, like black tendrils reaching out to pull him into the darkness. Dante freezes, unable to move, his heart pounding in his chest as the shadows close in around him. The voices start as a faint whisper at first, barely audible, like a breeze brushing past his ear. But soon they grow louder, more insistent, filling the room with a cacophony of eerie murmurs. They speak in a language he doesn't understand, yet the words feel familiar, like the memory of a nightmare long forgotten. The whispers swirl around him, growing more frantic, overlapping, until they become screams, agonized, desperate screams. He tries to cover his ears, but the sound penetrates his mind, filling him with a deep, bone-chilling dread. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he sees it. The velvet curtain over the portrait begins to move, as if something is stirring behind it. The fabric ripples, and a faint glow emerges from the edges, casting a sickly light across the room. Dante takes a step back, his heart racing, but he can't look away. The curtain pulls itself back, slowly revealing the painting beneath. But it's no longer the portrait of his youth. The figure in the painting has changed completely. It's not just aged, it's twisted into something monstrous. The eyes that stare back at him are hollow, dark pits filled with malice. The skin is cracked and peeling, revealing raw flesh beneath, and the smile, that horrid, crooked smile, stretches far too wide across the face, as if mocking him. Before he can react, the figure in the painting moves. Its hand, deformed and clawed, reaches out from the canvas, the fingers stretching toward him. Dante's breath catches in his throat as the hand inches closer, the nail scraping against the air with a sound that sets his teeth on edge. He tries to step back, to run, but his feet are rooted to the ground. The hand is almost upon him when he jolts awake, drenched in sweat, his heart hammering in his chest. But even in the waking world, the nightmare clings to him. The room is dark, and yet something is off. The air feels heavy, and the silence is too thick. He turns his head slowly toward the portrait, now covered again by the velvet curtain. But he swears, in the stillness of the night, he can hear it breathing. The night after the chilling dream, Dante finds himself once again slipping into the clutches of sleep, though he fights it with every fiber of his being. His fear of what awaits him on the other side of consciousness is palpable, but his exhaustion wins. As his eyes flutter shut, he is instantly transported back to the same room, the familiar studio, the suffocating stench of decay, the oppressive silence pressing down on him. But this time, the air feels different. It's heavier, as if something is waiting for him in the shadows, something far more sinister than before. Dante stands frozen in the center of the room, his eyes locked on the portrait, still covered by the heavy velvet curtain. The temperature drops rapidly, his breath now visible in the frigid air, and the once faint whispers return, growing louder and more insistent. His heart races as he takes a hesitant step toward the painting. The ground beneath his feet feels wrong, soft and yielding, as if the floorboards are no longer solid but flesh, pulsing with life. Every step sends a ripple through the room, the very walls seeming to breathe in sync with his movements. As he reaches for the velvet curtain, his hand trembles violently. His fingers brush the edge of the fabric, and for a moment, time seems to stand still. The room is so silent now that he can hear the blood rushing in his ears, the thudding of his heart echoing in the vast emptiness. But then, without warning, the curtain is violently ripped away, not by his hand, but by some unseen force. The portrait is fully revealed, and what he sees makes his blood run cold. The figure in the painting has transformed entirely. What was once a grotesque version of himself is now a horrific, unrecognizable entity. Its skin is rotted, hanging from the bones like tattered cloth. And the eyes are nothing more than hollow, black pits that seem to swallow all light. The mouth, once a twisted smile, is now a gaping maw filled with rows of jagged, broken teeth. The figure in the painting is no longer a mere reflection of Dante's aging. It has become a monster, a physical manifestation of his corruption and sins. Suddenly, the figure begins to move, not within the confines of the canvas, but out of it. The arms reach out, long and skeletal, the bones creaking and cracking as they stretch toward Dante. His body is paralyzed with fear, his mind screaming at him to run, but he cannot move. The air around him grows thick, suffocating, as if the very atmosphere is trying to strangle him. The creature pulls itself out of the painting, its body grotesquely twisting and contorting as it steps into the room. It moves with a sickening fluidity, like a marionette controlled by invisible strings, each step accompanied by the wet, slapping sound of decaying flesh hitting the floor. Dante's breath catches in his throat as the creature slowly advances on him. He stumbles backward, his legs finally obeying his frantic commands to move, but he is too slow. The creature's hand, if it can even be called that, reaches for him, its fingers long and sharp, each nail glinting in the dim light like a blade. The cold from the creature's touch seeps into Dante's skin, freezing him to the core. It grips him tightly, its touch more a vice than a hand, and with a sudden, violent jerk, it pulls him closer, dragging him toward the now empty frame where the portrait once hung. Dante struggles, his hands clawing at the air. But it is no use. The creature is far too strong, its grip unyielding. He can feel its breath on his neck, cold, rancid, filled with the stench of death. His heart pounds in his chest, each beat echoing in his ears like a drum, as the creature pulls him closer to the empty frame. He can see it now, the dark, swirling void where the painting once was, a black hole that seems to consume everything around it. It pulls at him, dragging him toward its inky depths. In a moment of pure, primal terror, Dante feels himself being pulled into the frame, the world around him warping and distorting as he is dragged into the void. The room stretches and twists, the walls bending like rubber, the floor disappearing beneath him. The creature lets out a guttural, inhuman growl as it forces him closer, its hollow eyes boring into him with a malice so intense that it feels like his soul is being ripped apart. He lets out a scream, but it is swallowed by the darkness. Just when it seems like all hope is lost, the scene shifts abruptly. Dante is no longer in the studio. He is back in his bed, drenched in sweat, his chest heaving as he gasps for air. For a moment, he thinks it was all just another nightmare, until he glances at the corner of the room. There, standing in the shadows, is the creature, its eyes glinting in the dim light, its skeletal hand raised in a mockery of a wave, as if bidding him farewell. And then, in the blink of an eye, it is gone. But the room is no longer the same. The portrait, which once hung on the wall in his studio, now sits at the foot of his bed, uncovered, its monstrous figure staring directly at him. Dante scrambles out of bed, his heart racing, as he realizes the terrifying truth. The line between his dreams and reality has been irrevocably blurred. The nightmare has followed him into the waking world, and now there is no escape. The following morning, Dante awoke with an overwhelming sense of dread. His body felt heavy, as if every muscle was weighed down by an unseen force. The events of the previous night, the horrific dream, the creature, were they real? As he sat up, his eyes instinctively darted to the foot of his bed where the portrait had appeared. It was still there, uncovered, and mocking him with its grotesque depiction. The figure in the painting had become more monstrous overnight. Its eyes, once sunken pits, now glistened with a malevolent shine, as if they had seen Dante's deepest fears and fed on them. Shaking, Dante threw on his robe and stumbled toward the painting. His hands trembled as he reached out, hesitating just inches from the canvas. He could feel the air around it growing colder, as though the painting itself exuded an unnatural chill. The image on the canvas seemed to pulse, almost alive, as if the figure could break free at any moment. Dante's heart pounded in his chest as a horrible realization crept into his mind. This was no mere nightmare. The boundary between the dream world and reality had fractured, and now, something dark had slipped through the cracks. Unable to tear his gaze away, Dante noticed something else, something even more disturbing. The room around him, his once grand and luxurious villa, had begun to mirror the decay of the painting. The rich wallpaper had started to peel, revealing blackened, rotting wood underneath. The floors, once polished and gleaming, were now scuffed and cracked, as though time had fast-forwarded and the villa had been left to rot for decades. A thick layer of dust coated every surface, and the air smelled of mold and dampness, filling his lungs with each shallow breath. It was as if the corruption from the portrait was leaking into the real world, consuming everything around him. Desperate for answers, Dante tore his gaze from the portrait and fled the room, his footsteps echoing through the eerily silent mansion. He needed to find the source of this curse, to understand why his life was spiraling into madness. His mind raced back to the fateful night when he made the deal with the mysterious stranger, the man who promised him eternal youth in exchange for a piece of his soul. It was supposed to be a metaphor, a harmless indulgence in the mystique of art and power. But now, Dante realized the cost had been far more literal than he ever could have imagined. Driven by fear, Dante rushed to his study, where he kept old journals and letters from the time of the bargain. The room was in shambles, papers scattered, the fireplace long extinguished. Frantically, he rifled through the drawers until he found what he was looking for, a weather journal, its pages yellowed with age. His hands shook as he flipped through the pages, his eyes scanning the cryptic notes he had once scribbled carelessly. There, in the margins of an old sketch, he found it, the name of the stranger who had introduced him to the dark art, Luther Raum, a man rumored to have dabbled in the occult, an art collector with ties to rituals far beyond the realm of simple deals. Dante's blood ran cold as he read the notes. Raum had warned him that the portrait was not just a representation of his physical appearance, but a mirror to his soul. Every sin, every indulgence, every moment of moral decay would not only age the painting, but corrupt it in ways that would be reflected in the real world. And now Dante understood. His sins, his vanity, and his cruelty were not confined to the canvas. They were seeping into his life, poisoning the walls of his home, turning his sanctuary into a tomb. Determined to end the nightmare, Dante made his way to the Grand Gallery, where he had first met Raum, the place where the deal was sealed. As he descended the marble staircase, a feeling of dread washed over him. The gallery had changed. The once grand tapestries were now moth-eaten, hanging limp from the walls. Statues of ancient gods and heroes, which once stood tall and proud, had cracked and crumbled, their faces twisted into expressions of torment. The floor was slick with something dark and sticky, and the air was thick with the stench of decay. At the center of the gallery stood the easel where his portrait had once been painted, but now the canvas was empty. A black void stretched across the frame. The figure that once inhabited the painting had completely disappeared. Panic surged through Dante. Was the creature loose in his home? Was it hiding, waiting for the moment to strike? Desperate, he turned to leave, but something caught his eye, a mirror, standing in the corner of the room. It was an old, ornate piece, covered in dust and forgotten. Slowly, he approached it, his reflection distorted in the dirty glass. As he wiped away the grime, he saw not his own face, but the face of the creature from the portrait staring back at him. Its hollow eyes, its gnarled smile, its decaying flesh. It was him. The truth hit him like a hammer. He had become the monster. The corruption wasn't just in the portrait, it was inside him. His knees buckled as he collapsed to the floor, the weight of his sins crushing him. He had thought the portrait was a prison for his corruption, but in reality, it had merely been a window. The monster had always been there, inside him, festering, waiting to be unleashed. The mansion, the dreams, the decay, it was all a reflection of the darkness within. And then, from behind him, he heard it, the soft, raspy breathing, the same sound he had heard in his dreams. Slowly, painfully, Dante turned to face the source of the sound. In the doorway stood the creature, no longer confined to canvas, no longer hidden in the recesses of his mind. It was real, flesh and blood, and it was coming for him. Dante's heart raced as the creature lingered in the doorway, its grotesque form filling the room with an unbearable weight of terror. Its hollow eyes, now glinting with a sickening hunger, locked onto him. The air grew thick with a suffocating presence, as if the darkness itself was alive and pressing against his skin, wrapping him in a cloak of dread. The creature did not move at first, but its mere presence made the walls of the mansion seem to close in around him. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway sounded like the heartbeat of the villa, slow and ominous, each tick pushing Dante further toward madness. He knew that running was futile. This thing wasn't bound by the laws of the physical world. It was a manifestation of his own corruption, his own sins-given flesh. But despite his terror, a primal survival instinct kicked in. Dante scrambled to his feet, his body trembling with fear as he backed away from the creature. His mind raced, searching for some way to escape, some way to rid himself of the curse that had infected his life. As the creature took a slow, deliberate step forward, Dante bolted from the gallery, his footsteps echoing through the decaying hallways of Villa Gris. The once elegant corridors had now become a labyrinth of rot and shadows. the walls seemingly shifting and warping as he ran. He could hear the faint scraping of the creature's nails against the floor behind him, a constant reminder that it was never far, always following, always hunting. The air grew colder with each passing second, Dante's breath coming in ragged gasps as he stumbled through the darkened halls. Desperate for answers for any chance of survival, Dante remembered an old colleague, an art historian named Elias, who had once dabbled in occult lore and had warned him about the dangers of toying with dark magic. Elias had mentioned the existence of ancient rituals that could undo curses, but the price would be steep. Dante knew that finding Elias was his only hope, but there was no time to leave the mansion. The creature was too close. He had to confront it here, in the heart of the nightmare he had created. In a panic, Dante made his way to the basement of Villa Gris, a place he had rarely visited. The cellar was a labyrinthine crypt of forgotten relics, covered in dust and cobwebs, but it was also where Elias had once visited him to examine some of Dante's more occult pieces. As he descended the narrow, crumbling staircase, the sound of the creature's relentless pursuit echoed behind him. His legs felt weak, his vision blurred by the overwhelming fear coursing through his veins. But he had no choice. He had to face the darkness head-on. The basement was lit only by a single flickering candle, its flame barely able to pierce the suffocating gloom. Old statues and canvases were draped in sheets, their ghostly forms adding to the oppressive atmosphere. As Dante moved deeper into the cellar, he stumbled upon a forgotten bookcase, its shelves filled with ancient tomes and dusty scrolls. He frantically scanned the spines, his shaking hands pulling down volumes of forgotten knowledge, until he found it, a worn leather-bound book covered in strange, arcane symbols. It was Elias' journal, filled with notes on the dark rituals and curses that Dante had foolishly dismissed. Flipping through the pages, Dante's eyes landed on a passage that sent a chill down his spine. The ritual to break the curse was there, but it came with a devastating cost. To sever the connection between the portrait and himself, Dante would have to destroy not just the painting, but a piece of his own soul. The ritual required blood, sacrifice, and the destruction of the object that tied his soul to the curse, his own portrait. The price was his life, but in exchange, the creature that haunted him would be banished forever. As he read the final lines of the passage, the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps echoed through the cellar. The creature had found him. Its rasping breath filled the air, and Dante felt its presence closing in, pressing against him like an invisible hand. He had no time to waste. Grabbing the journal and a sharp ceremonial dagger from the shelf, Dante made his way to the center of the cellar, where a circle of old candles stood in a ritualistic pattern, long forgotten but still potent. With trembling hands, he carved the ancient symbols into the floor, his blood mixing with the dust and dirt as he chanted the incantation from Elias' journal. The words felt foreign on his tongue, each syllable sending a jolt of terror through his body as the darkness around him seemed to pulse in response. The creature drew closer, its breath now hot on the back of his neck, but Dante couldn't stop. The ritual demanded focus, or it would fail, and failure meant an eternity of torment. Just as Dante completed the final sigil, the creature lunged at him, its skeletal hands wrapped around his throat, its foul stench filling his lungs as it squeezed, threatening to snuff out his life. Dante gasped for air, his vision blurring, but with the last of his strength, he raised the dagger and plunged it into the center of the portrait's likeness, his own heart mirrored in the painting. The impact was immediate. The creature let out an ear-splitting scream, a sound so unnatural and piercing that it rattled the very walls of the mansion. Its grip on Dante loosened as it writhed in agony, its form dissolving into black smoke, swirling violently around the cellar before being sucked into the void where the portrait once hung. The air crackled with dark energy as the creature was pulled back into the painting, its screams fading into the distance until there was nothing but silence. Dante collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath, his body weak from the ritual and the battle. The portrait was gone, reduced to ash, and the connection to the curse had been severed. But as he lay there, bleeding and broken, he realized the true cost of his victory. His youth, his beauty, all gone. His body began to wither, aging rapidly before his very eyes. In a matter of moments, he became a hollow shell of the man he once was, his face wrinkled, his skin sagging with the weight of years he had cheated. He had defeated the creature, but at the cost of everything he had once held dear. As Dante lay on the cold, damp floor of the cellar, his body now frail and aged, he felt the weight of his sins crushing him. His once youthful face was now lined with deep wrinkles, his hands gnarled and trembling. He had paid the price for his vanity, but the creature was gone, or so he thought. The air around him was heavy with silence, the kind of silence that suffocates, pressing against his ears until even his own ragged breathing seemed too loud. He tried to stand, but his legs, now weak and brittle, barely supported his weight. Suddenly, the flickering candlelight around him began to sputter. One by one, the flames extinguished, plunging the cellar into near darkness. The only light left came from the faint glow of the dying embers in the fireplace, casting long, eerie shadows that seemed to dance along the walls, mocking him. The temperature dropped drastically, and Dante felt a familiar chill creep up his spine. His breath formed small clouds in the freezing air, and a sense of dread filled him once again. Something was wrong. The creature was supposed to be gone, banished forever by the ritual. But as Dante's eyes adjusted to the darkness, he noticed something out of place, a figure standing in the corner of the cellar, half hidden in the shadows. His heart skipped a beat. It was impossible. The ritual had worked, hadn't it? The figure stepped forward, slowly, deliberately, emerging from the shadows with an almost graceful fluidity. Dante's breath caught in his throat. It wasn't the creature, not in the grotesque, monstrous form he had battled before. No, this figure was different. It looked human, almost too human. The face was unnervingly familiar, with smooth, flawless skin, sharp features, and eyes that gleamed with cold intelligence. It was a face Dante knew all too well. It was his face. The shock hit him like a punch to the gut. Standing before him was a younger version of himself, the same youthful face that had once adorned his portrait before it began to decay. The reflection of the man he used to be. The figure smiled, a cruel, twisted smile that sent a shiver through Dante's bones. The air around them thickened with an unnatural energy, the tension so palpable it felt as though the room itself was closing in. "Did you really think you could escape me?" the figure said, its voice a distorted echo of Dante's own. It stepped closer, the sound of its footsteps unnaturally loud in the silence. "You can't run from what you are. I am you, Dante. Everything you've ever tried to hide. Your sins, your lies, your darkness. I am all of it." Dante's mouth went dry. He tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat, choking on the terror that now consumed him. This wasn't a mere reflection. It was something far worse. This was the embodiment of every vile, selfish act he had ever committed. His corruption, his vanity, his cruelty, all given form, all given life. The creature hadn't been banished. It had merely transformed into something far more sinister. The figure moved closer still, until it was only inches from Dante, its cold, dead eyes locking onto his. "You thought destroying the portrait would save you," it whispered, its breath icy against Dante's cheek. "You were wrong. You are beyond saving." In that moment, Dante realized the horrifying truth. The curse had never been about the portrait. The painting had only been a mirror, a vessel to contain the darkness that had always lived within him. Now that the portrait was gone, there was nothing to hold the evil at bay. The creature had become him, and it would consume him from the inside out. The figure's hand shot out, grabbing Dante's wrist with a grip like iron. Dante gasped, his frail body trembling as the figure's cold fingers dug into his skin. A sharp, searing pain shot up his arm, spreading through his entire body like wildfire. He could feel it, his essence, his very soul, being drained, pulled into the creature that wore his face. His vision blurred, and the edges of the room seemed to warp and twist as his strength faded. Desperate, Dante fought to pull away, but the creature's grip was unbreakable. It leaned in closer, its breath cold against Dante's ear. "You can't fight what you've become," it hissed, its voice now a low, guttural growl. "I am you, Dante. Every time you lied, every time you betrayed, every time you indulged in your darkest desires, you fed me. And now, I'm all that's left." Dante's knees buckled, and he collapsed to the floor, his body crumpling under the weight of his own corruption. The figure towered over him, watching with cold amusement as Dante's strength ebbed away. The pain was unbearable, like his soul was being torn apart piece by piece. But worse than the physical agony was the realization that he had done this to himself. Every choice he had made, every selfish act, had led him here, to this moment of ultimate destruction. The figure crouched down beside him, its eyes gleaming with malice. "You were always afraid of growing old, of losing your beauty, your power," it whispered. "But now look at you. You've become everything you feared." With the last of his strength, Dante tried to speak, but his voice was barely a whisper. "Please, no." The creature smiled, a cold, empty smile that showed no trace of mercy. "It's too late, Dante," it said softly, almost mockingly. "This is who you are now. This is who you've always been." As the figure's grip tightened around Dante's wrist, a dark fog began to swirl around them, rising from the floor and enveloping them both. The shadows seemed to come alive, twisting and writhing like snakes, pulling Dante deeper into the darkness. His vision blurred, the world around him fading into nothingness as his soul was consumed by the very evil he had created. In his final moments, as the darkness closed in, Dante saw his younger self standing over him, still smiling that cruel, twisted smile. The last thing he heard was his own voice, echoing through the void. "You can't escape yourself." And then, silence. Villa Gris stood silent once more, the ancient mansion consumed by shadows, its secrets locked away within its decaying walls. No one would ever know the true horror that had transpired there, the terrible fate of a man who had tried to cheat death and lost everything in the process. The portrait was gone, the curse seemingly broken, but the darkness remained, lurking in the corners of the forgotten mansion, waiting for the next soul foolish enough to seek immortality. In the end, Dante had not defeated the creature. He had become it, and it waited patiently for the next victim to take his place. The night had swallowed Villa Gris, leaving only shadows and whispers in its wake. The once grand mansion, now an empty shell, sat in silence, its decaying walls holding the secrets of Dante Galen's downfall. Yet, even in the eerie stillness, there was a lingering sense that the story was far from over. The darkness that had claimed Dante now crept through the mansion like a living entity, spreading its malevolence into every corner, every crevice. The air was thick with the weight of unanswered questions, of mysteries left unsolved. But what had really happened to Dante? The villa itself seemed to have absorbed his essence, his sins, and his soul. His portrait had been reduced to ash, but there was a growing sense that something far worse had taken its place. The nightmarish reflection of Dante had not disappeared. It had simply found a new home. Somewhere within the shadows of the mansion, it waited, hidden, watching for its next victim. And what of the creature that had once been Dante? Had it truly consumed him, or was it now bound to the mansion, trapped in the endless corridors of Villa Gris, waiting to be released? The mansion had become a prison, not just for Dante's soul, but for something much darker. Those who wandered too close to the villa could feel it, an oppressive force that seemed to pull at them, a whisper on the wind, beckoning them to enter. The villagers nearby spoke of the mansion in hushed tones, warning anyone who would listen to stay away from its gates. Some claimed they had seen a figure, a shadowy silhouette, standing in the windows at night, its face too blurred to make out, but its presence undeniable. There were rumors, of course, rumors of a curse, of a man who had traded his soul for eternal youth and beauty, only to be consumed by his own creation. But no one knew the full truth. No one dared to venture inside Villa Gray to uncover what had become of Dante Galen, the once great painter whose obsession with perfection had led him to ruin. The doors of the mansion had remained locked, the key lost to time, but the darkness within was restless. It would not be contained forever. Now, the question remains, what really happened that night in the cellar? Had Dante truly been destroyed, or had he simply become one with the darkness that had consumed him? The creature that had once been bound to the portrait was now free, no longer confined to canvas or dreams. It had taken on a life of its own, an entity born from Dante's sins and vanity, lurking in the corners of the forgotten mansion, waiting for the next soul to feed upon. But perhaps the most terrifying thought of all is that the curse may not have died with Dante. The portrait may be gone, but its power lives on, embedded in the very walls of Villa Gray. Anyone who steps foot inside risks awakening the darkness that still resides there. The shadows watch, the silence listens, and the mansion waits. The curse is patient. It does not care who its next victim is, it only hungers. Imagine, for a moment, that you are the one who stumbles upon Villa Gray. Would you dare enter? Could you resist the pull of curiosity, the desire to know what truly happened to Dante Galen? As you step through the gates, the world around you seems to change. The air thickens, the wind stills, and the once distant whispers now seem to be right beside you, calling your name. The mansion looms ahead, its windows dark and empty, but you feel eyes upon you. You turn, but no one is there. You approach the door, your heart pounding in your chest, and as your hand reaches for the handle, the whispers grow louder. They speak of secrets, of promises of eternal youth, of a curse that can never be broken. But do you open the door? Do you dare to find out what lies within, knowing full well that Villa Gray does not give up its secrets easily? The choice is yours, but remember, not every door should be opened. The story of Dante Galen may be over, but Villa Gray remains. And as long as the mansion stands, so too does the curse. Perhaps one day, someone will be brave or foolish enough to uncover the truth. Until then, the shadows wait, the whispers continue, and the darkness grows ever stronger. But before we leave you with this chilling mystery, we want to hear from you. What do you think happened to Dante? Was he truly consumed by the creature? Or did he somehow survive in a different form? Could there be more to the curse than we know? Share your theories in the comments below, and let's dive into the unsettling possibilities together. And don't forget, if you enjoyed this story, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell. You won't want to miss the next terrifying tale we have in store. Remember, Villa Gray is waiting. And who knows, maybe the next time you pass by a dark, abandoned mansion, you'll hear the whispers calling your name. Will you answer? Or will you, like Dante, fall victim to the darkness that waits within? The choice is yours, but tread carefully. Not every mystery should be solved. The night had fully enveloped Villa Gray, casting the mansion into a darkness so deep that it seemed to swallow the moonlight entirely. Inside, the oppressive silence of the house pressed against the walls, as if the very air within it had been consumed by the shadow of what once resided there. The halls were empty, yet they seemed alive with unseen eyes watching from every corner, waiting for the next soul foolish enough to step inside. The story of Dante Galen, now a whispered legend in the nearby village, had faded into myth. But the truth was far darker than anyone could imagine. Dante had not merely vanished, he had become something else entirely. The curse had taken root in the very bones of the mansion, twisting reality around it, warping the essence of time and space within its walls. Now, Villa Gray was more than just a decaying estate. It was a trap, a living, breathing entity that hungered for the unwary. And yet the question lingers, is Dante truly gone? Or is he still there, lost in the shadows, waiting for someone to release him? The villagers would never dare to find out. They spoke of eerie lights flickering in the windows at night, of cold winds that howled from the mansion when the rest of the world stood still. Some claimed to have seen a figure, young, beautiful, and eerily familiar, pacing the grounds in the dead of night, though no one dared approach close enough to confirm. But the whispers had never ceased. It was said that if you stood at the gates of Villa Gris on a quiet night, you could hear faint voices carried on the wind. Some claimed they heard Dante's voice, calling for help. Others heard something darker, guttural, unintelligible words that chilled the very soul. Whatever it was, those who heard it never stayed long. And yet, despite the warnings, there were always those curious enough or foolish enough to venture inside. As you approach the mansion, the path grows colder with each step, the temperature plummeting unnaturally fast. The night is still, too still, and the air feels heavy, as though the atmosphere itself is holding its breath. Your footsteps echo unnervingly through the empty space, swallowed by the eerie quiet of the surrounding forest. The iron gates, rusted and twisted, creak open as if expecting you, welcoming you into the maw of the beast. Once inside the grounds, the feeling of being watched grows stronger. You glance around, half expecting to see someone or something lurking in the shadows, but the grounds are empty. The trees sway gently in the cold wind, but no sound accompanies their movement. The only noise is the faint, almost imperceptible hum that seems to come from deep within the mansion itself, as though the walls are breathing in sync with your own heartbeat. The front doors of Villa Gris, massive and ornate, stand ajar as if inviting you to enter. You hesitate. You can feel the weight of the mansion's gaze on you, a sentient presence that fills the air with dread. The whispers begin, soft at first, just a murmur in the back of your mind. But as you step closer, they grow louder, swirling around you like 1,000 voices speaking in unison, telling stories you cannot quite understand. Yet, amidst the chaos, one voice stands out, a voice that sounds hauntingly familiar, but you can't place it. You cross the threshold, and the temperature drops further, your breath now visible in the frigid air. The interior of the mansion is even more unsettling than the outside. Dust coats every surface, yet the air feels dense, as though it has never truly left this place. The once grand furnishings are now decayed, falling apart from years of neglect, but there's something else, something you can't quite put into words. The walls feel wrong. The way the shadows bend and twist as you move makes the space feel unnatural, distorted. You hear it again, the voice, clearer this time. It calls your name. Suddenly, the hallway stretches before you, impossibly long, the door at the end growing more distant the closer you get. You glance over your shoulder, but the entrance behind you is gone. The mansion has sealed itself, trapping you within its dark embrace. Panic claws at your throat, but the voice continues, soothing, beckoning you deeper into the house. Against your better judgment, you follow it, your footsteps slow and cautious, your heartbeat loud in your ears. As you move through the twisting corridors, you can feel the walls shifting around you, changing the layout of the house. Rooms that once led to the main hall now open into shadowy voids, their contents swallowed by darkness. The portraits on the walls, faded and cracked, seem to watch you as you pass. Their eyes follow your every move, accusing, judgmental. One of the paintings catches your eye, a portrait of a young man, eerily familiar, with sharp features and eyes that seem to bore into your soul. It's Dante. The portrait is impossibly pristine compared to the others, its colors vivid and lifelike. But there's something wrong with his face. It seems to move, shifting subtly as you stare at it. The corners of his mouth curl upward into a twisted, mocking smile, and his eyes, once filled with vanity, now shimmer with malice. You can feel it in your gut. Dante is not gone. He is here, somewhere in the house, watching you, waiting. You turn away from the portrait, but the whispers continue to grow louder. The voice, his voice, is almost deafening now, urging you toward the cellar. Your body moves as if under some unseen force, compelling you forward against your will. Down the creaking stairs you go, deeper into the bowels of the mansion, where the air is thick and stale. The cellar is pitch black, but as you step into the darkness, a faint glow emanates from the center of the room. There, in the middle of the cellar, stands a mirror. Its surface ripples like water, reflecting not your own face, but Dante's. His image is warped, grotesque, his skin cracked and peeling, his eyes hollow and sunken. He grins at you through the glass, a sickening, triumphant smile that sends a chill down your spine. You realize too late what's happening. The mirror isn't just reflecting him. It's pulling him back into the world, using you as the conduit. The last thing you see before the darkness swallows you whole is Dante's hand reaching through the glass, and the faint, twisted sound of his laughter as you are dragged into the void. And now, you have to ask yourself, would you dare enter Villa Gray? What would you do if you heard the whispers calling your name? Could you resist the pull of the mansion? Or would you, like so many before, be consumed by the darkness? The story of Dante Galen may be over, but the curse of Villa Gray lives on. The mansion waits, its hunger never fully sated, always searching for the next soul to claim. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think really happened to Dante? Could there be a way to break the curse? Or is it destined to continue, trapping anyone foolish enough to enter? And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another tale of terror. Villa Gray may be waiting for you next.